Hello, everybody, wherever you are in the world. This is TechVision with the Ojo Yoshida report. We've got a special guest today. Is the Vice President of Customer Success at Renesas. And well, he's a holdover from an acquisition that Renesas made recently that also kind of made the company a story to watch. And I'm really, really pleased to welcome to TechVision Ted Pawela. Like I said, Ted Pawela is the Vice President of Customer Success at Renesas. Now, we're going to talk, and we plan to talk about Renesas 365. A lot of us have heard the word 365. In this case, though, we're talking about Renesas 365 powered by Altium, which is the company that Renesas acquired recently. But let's start by just talking about Ted's position as the head of customer success, because everything is kind of connected together. So, Ted, welcome to TechVision. Let's talk about you first. Give us an introduction about yourself, your previous role, and your current role at Renesas.
Sure. Thank you for having us. First of all, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about Renesas 365. So my name, as you said, is Ted Pawela, and in my role as the head of customer success, it's actually for Renesas Digital Industries. So that's one of the business units created within overall Renesas company, and even that name, Digital Industries, signals an evolution for Renesas in the sense that it has historically been a semiconductor company and full stop. Now,
Yeah.
the addition of Altium that I came into the company from, Renesas has much more of a digital transformation orientation as well, where we're bringing software applications, not just for embedded software, but for design, for lifecycle management, and manufacturing, all kinds of things that have to do with making the concept of a system, into something real, something physical. So in that role, I'm responsible for, again, with respect to these software applications, product management, product marketing. I lead the professional services team for our enterprise customer segment, and our technical support teams, and maybe importantly, our what we call our platform adoption team. So these are all teams that are working very closely with customers, whether that's for getting feedback on our products and taking that feedback and making it help to improve our products, or dealing with their day-to-day issues. Notably, I mentioned platform adoption, and that kind of leads me, right to this topic of Renesas 365, because it is really um, moving us into being a platform company. Um,
Right.
and the idea really is to be able to put all of the things that have to happen in developing electronic systems onto a kind of a unified digital platform. And yeah, that's really what it's all about. So, those are the responsibilities that I have, and I get the pleasure of interacting with a lot of our mutual customers, both Renesas and Altium.
Interestingly, Ted, so let's just kind of do a little, let's move a little bit to the side and talk about Altium.
Yeah.
There's a reason why Renesas decided, okay, we want this company to be a part of our ongoing operation. So, as briefly as you can, let's talk about Altium. You worked for Altium. What was Altium, and what made it so appealing, such an appealing proposition for Renesas, a semiconductor company, a traditional semiconductor company?
Yeah. So I spent the last 10 years working at Altium up until the acquisition. And Altium at that time was, I guess we called it a pure play PCB company. So we
Okay.
made ECAD software to be able to design printed circuit boards. But over the course of that 10 years, we expanded the portfolio to not just design printed circuit boards, but to start to bridge into the manufacturing world. We acquired a company called Octopart, which was an electronic components search engine, still today is, one of the leading ones in that. But, over those 10 years, Altium went from being um, kind of a low market share competitor to really having a
Hmm.
fairly dominant market position in PCB design. But notably, during that time, we developed a cloud platform that we called Altium 365.
Okay.
And I think I bring that up because I think both our success in penetrating the market, but also that platform was of high interest to Renesas. And I remember the first time, my first interaction with the Renesas team was in some partner discussions to say, how could we take this vision that we both jointly had for streamlining the entire development process, and make that vision real. And we knew we sort of both recognized that the underpinning of that needed to be a platform where we could unify information, where people could collaborate, and we could take the tools, the kind of the best in class tools that we both had, and make them be less standalone tools and make them a part of a design and development system.
The semiconductor industry itself has had to change from, the situation where you talk about components to talking about subsystems and systems. And I think that in Renesas' case, maybe they just decided, you know what, we're not just going to talk about it. We're just going to go ahead and do it and be a systems company. That I think I see that as part of the transformation of Renesas itself. So Altium just found the right place to fit in, if I can characterize it like that.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that was we were the right company to match their vision, and we had a very similar vision. And realistically, as a smaller company, we were roughly a 800, 900 person company as Altium compared to 20,000 plus people at Renesas, and so the capabilities that we had to make that vision reality, we kind of recognized that would be extraordinarily difficult to do on our own. So it
Mhm.
really makes sense for Altium to sort of join forces, so to speak, with Renesas, and from Renesas's perspective to acquire a company that had expertise in software and application software, and also had that platform and people who understood the vision for what they wanted
Right.
to.
The one, so this slide that you have showing here says talks about an industry solution for silicon to systems. So let's even pull out and not talk about Renesas or talk about Altium or Renesas 365. Let's just talk about this particular sentence here, where you say the industry needs to have solutions that moves from silicon on the semiconductor side to systems. And,
Yeah.
and there are companies in the marketplace that are providing those kind of services that sometimes today we describe them as semiconductor companies, but in reality, they are systems companies. So let's talk about that life cycle management process. And then if you
Yeah.
can zero in and talk about where Renesas 365 fits in here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll highlight, one thing I like to highlight is that there are, as everyone would know, there are companies who specialize in product lifecycle management, or PLM.
Right.
And the key thing is that those systems largely have been kind of designed and developed through the lens of people making mechanical systems largely. And as you would well know, electronics is different. We don't kind of create bespoke components like we would for a suspension system in a vehicle, or a landing gear system for an aircraft. We're taking commercial off-the-shelf silicon and passive components, active components, power systems, all those things, and putting them together, into a system. So I guess the first thing is just that I think uh, the industry now that's I think of our industry as one that is driven by products whose value is largely defined by software today, right?
Yes,
Think
that's
about
that's that's so true. That's so
yeah,
true.
Yeah, and so it's a little bit of a different definition for an industry. Instead of saying aerospace, automotive, consumer products, industrial, systems. Now these are all, all of them have a subset of those industries, and maybe it's a large subset that now really needs to make smart products, right? That's what the market demands. And so therefore, they're building electronics in and they're finding sort of the shortcomings in some of those systems. So that's a little bit the really high level problem that we're trying to address. And if you
Mhm.
think about this life cycle as depicted here, you start with the concept and there's some requirements that it needs to meet up for a system. And then you begin to, break that down into subsystems and components, like you said, and you do all of these things. And where our combined expertise of now the joined company of Renesas and Altium, um, lies, it lies in this center section, but I will say it also expands a little bit further even to the left, um,
Okay.
in terms of requirements and systems architecture as well. But it spans actually then, you know, when you think about building an electronic system, you start with a block diagram, right? And you say, these are
Mhm.
the subsystems that I need. And we are trying to make it such that that's not just like a Visio diagram or a PowerPoint diagram, that's actually a functional model that can evolve as you go through detailed design, like choosing your components, developing those electronic subsystems, creating a printed circuit board, running the simulations that are required to understand how it will physically behave. All of those things are core to what we do. And so, yeah, I think this is, again, where our expertise lies. And the system of Renaissance 365 is really meant to help track and trace and guide people through that process, but again, on one platform, and still, stay using the tools that they want, but have this backplane of collaboration, a backplane of sharing of information and data, so that the process works more efficiently and more effectively.
This is a process, okay? So that or maybe I should put it better as a transition phase, and that transition is not just occurring at Renesas; it's occurring across the industry, and maybe you are just a bit ahead in realizing or understanding that where you need to be is so far ahead. So let's talk about where you need to be, where the industry needs to be, and what are the challenges to getting there. If to make a semiconductor company more of a systems provider, because nobody is just going out there and saying. Very few OEM procurement people are going out and saying, I want these components and those components. They want a system or a subsystem at the very least. Where are we at now in that whole transition? What are the challenges that we see here?
Yeah, and actually, you're a good setup man for this, in that we do have a slide that speaks to challenges,
Okay.
um, and I think it's the very next one. So,
Oh,
these are some of the challenges that we see, right? In that, none of these systems are built by a single person or even by
okay.
a single functional team. So, you think about it, you have electrical engineers who are largely doing the system design and systems engineers. You have PCB layout designers and engineers who are developing the physical hardware. You have procurement people, you have management, you have a lot of people who are sort of like touching everything in this process. And so they all use different tools. They're all also more or less isolated from each other in many ways, sometimes geographically, sometimes just by virtue of their functional teams. But that's one of the challenges. The other thing is
Okay.
that, like, component selection itself, it's interesting. We want to, if you think about selecting an MCU, for example, you want to understand how that MCU fits into an application. You have this word context behind you, I see on the screen, and for us, I think that's really important. It's like what is the context for that? MCU within your application, right? Well, how is it going to be used? And ideally, wouldn't it be nice if we could, rather than just select that MCU and then build everything around it from a clean sheet of paper, if we had some subsystems that were already largely configured to that kind of application, and you could just modify it. So it kind of gets to design reuse and everything, but key is, understanding, and not, when I say understanding, I mean context, right? Having the context of what you, and sharing that context with everyone else in that process so that they likewise can make good decisions knowing what you're trying to achieve, right? And we think that in particular, in a digital sense, in other words, in a shared information sense, that context is lacking. So we're trying again on that back plane of the Altium 365 platform underneath to provide an opportunity for people to share that context. And as they're making design decisions, keep building on it, right? So that the context grows all the time and everyone knows. So, the lack of those things slows down your prototyping and validation. The other thing is a great example of where this collaboration can really make a huge difference is there in prototyping and validation. If you think about what an embedded software developer is creating versus the people on the hardware side. So they're largely extremely isolated from one another. And wouldn't it be great if when you are developing software to run on that MCU, you could actually see how it affects things physically. So simple example would be, say, I have a net list and want to say, well, where is this particular net? Where is this on hardware? And if something's going wrong, could it be as simple as that net is not connected where it's supposed to be? And to be able to do that kind of cross probing between your embedded software code and your hardware is something that we can do on this platform that, really, again, streamlines and makes the process more efficient. So
We're
then,
gonna dive. Sorry, go on, Ted.
no, then I was just going to say these other 2 points, I think, we all know again, AI is, we used to say software is eating the world. AI is now largely kind of eating the world too. And to me, it kind of ties into this idea of life cycle. If you think about life cycle, one of the aspects of it is what I would call like device fleet management or system fleet management, even, right? So imagine that we have some kind of a robot and we're using an AI algorithm for that robot to kind of make decisions about what it's doing and how it reacts to the environment around us. And inevitably, we're going to be improving those AI algorithms. They're evolving so fast, right? And so when we
Mhm.
evolve them, we don't want to have to bring all that hardware back into a factory and do that. We want to be able to, whether it's wired or it's over the air, we want to be able to push out updates to that. And that's a really good example of, kind of what I would call a life cycle challenge that we have in electronics.
We're going to dive deeper into the specifics of Renesas 365 in a minute, but I still want to kind of look at the industry process itself. When you bring Renesas and Altium together, okay, there are quite a lot of factors that you may be looking at. Let's say the CEO of Renesas at the time, but one of them is life cycle. What does that union do to that whole life cycle? Because you're looking at issues of cost, you're looking at issues of testing, and all of that. I mean, you want to try and get these done, not later on down the line. You want to be doing it as you're going ahead. What are those? I mean, I see here. What are the pillars that you're addressing here?
Yeah, I think so. I think this slide, talks to some of what your question is asking, and that is that you're absolutely right. We want to take all of these things from your silicon selection to putting embedded software on that and sometimes AI algorithms, but also, looking at things more from a solution perspective than just a component selection.
Right.
Um, and then moving that into, kind of like the domain of hardware and physical world. The key thing that you're talking about is that you don't want to have to, if we rely on, every engineer, every designer, every buyer, every person to kind of go back and document what they did as a follow-on task, we're inevitably
Mm.
going to, kind of fail.
It's going to be a long journey
Yeah, that's
with
a long
so
term.
many people that you're going to be asking questions along the way.
Yeah. So I think this is the important part of this union is again having the ability to be able to pull the documentation of decisions along the way to have that automatically captured in a system on
Mm.
a digital system that everyone who's involved in a program or a project can see. That's really that's really a key thing. And I think, again, with respect to this union, we need all of these things. Altium did not have it all by any means. Even Renesas, as big a company as it is, did not have all of it. But together, we have a lot more, right? And we're much closer to achieving that sort of ultimate vision of uniting that entire process. So, we look at it again as saying Renesas 365 is this core sort of, platform underneath that allows you to find and discover solutions. And when I say solution, again, not just the MCU or MPU, it's now, finding a subsystem that is largely like what you're looking for to move that into the detailed development phase, to track all of the life cycle aspect of it from beginning to end, and do that, through both silicon and software, right? And again, when I say software, I'm talking about the embedded software that must run on that silicon.
I find your Ted, I find your title at Renesas quite interesting, Vice President of Customer Success, because it basically says, okay, our focus is the customer, right? And
Yeah.
we need to talk with them to find out what makes them successful. So now let's take a look at Renesas 365. Let's break it down and
Mhm.
say, okay, if Ted Pawela was talking to somebody in the industry and saying, I'm here to make this OEM successful in their marketplace, and here is Renesas 365. Here are the elements of Renesas 365 that will move you towards that success that you want. So let's break it down.
Yeah, I would say, my teams, and myself, I mean, what we're really responsible for, first of all, is to understand what customers are trying to do and where they're having challenges, right?
Okay.
And then to take that information and to ensure that the people we have who are uh, making the design decisions for our products are doing that in a way that will solve those problems, right? And I mean that's a big part of what we do, but it's not the only part because from there, it's our job to then communicate those things effectively to customers to say we understand you and we understand the problems that you're facing, and here's how we can help. And then, when a customer makes that decision to work with us, then it's also our job to stay with them to ensure that we haven't just sold them on a dream, but that we're actually doing our part to ensure they get the benefit of what they're investing in. And so, that's part of what that is what our professional services team is really all about. It's helping to make sure that our systems from silicon to system, all of that gets deployed in the customer environment properly, that it runs, that it meets their expectations, and that we're always listening to them so that we can improve it and make it even better. And really, that's what the customer success function at Renesas is all about.
I'm going to split this question into two, where so people don't think, oh, you know what, these are just softball questions for Ted Pawela at Renesas, because you said something earlier on. You said, okay, the industry is not really there yet. Okay, this is a journey, and Renesas decided, okay, you know what, we need to add these elements. so that we can ensure the success of our customers. So there are challenges still on the way. There are challenges being resolved now, and there are challenges that are known but are not being resolved. But let's start with, with some of the things that you've seen that Renesas 365 is delivering for customers now. I'm not talking about high level kind of marketing talk, right? I'm talking about the solutions that you are providing that the customer is like, yes, that's what I need. And then we're going to move to the challenges that you still see.
Yeah. Well, so in sort of full disclosure here, I would say, to be clear, Renesas 365 is not generally available yet. So we effectively announced it at at Embedded World in Nuremberg in March. And the
Yes.
idea behind announcing it was really to kind of share with our customers what our vision for this is and to show them some early prototyping so that they could see what it's intended to do.
Yeah.
And so, and it'll be late 2025, early 2026 in that time frame when we start to have it generally available for people. So the phase that we're in right now is, moving from that early prototype that we showed into a kind of a beta phase where with a small number of customers, to work to get feedback and to, ensure it works properly, to make it better and make sure it sort of meets their use cases and their challenges. So that's where we are today. Um, and that'll be, as you said, it's a process, to get there, and to make that real. And I will say again, just sort of a simple, maybe simple examples, even at Embedded World, having customers stand and look at what we were doing and be able to, from this cloud, sort of like web browser environment, show them how they could start to search not just for a component, but to be able to say, as an example, we had somebody there who said, my company makes these traffic monitoring and sort of flow control systems so that we can optimize in a city, for example, the flow of traffic by how the traffic lights work.
Mhm.
And so, we showed them there how, a starting point could be that they could find some other camera-based monitoring system and then be able to build their block diagram from that base system, make changes to what that reference system was, and add in AI algorithms and things like that, right? Now, going a step further, we then showed them from within that browser how they could take the Renesas E Squared Studio product, which is an IDE for embedded software development, and pull that up alongside that block diagram, right? And for them to be able to see physically how things light up when they select a section of code and say, this is the subsystem that this is attached to. We literally had people saying, oh, please tell me you're going to show me that. And then be able to do it was actually really kind of, exciting and gratifying to say, okay, we're on the right track here, that people want to be able to do these things. Then further, we had a demo system set up there that was there were 5 robotic plotters in our booth, and it was just doing a
Okay.
simple thing. It was recognizing someone's face, was creating a sketch from that, and taking that sketch, putting it into a large, or take that photo, put it into a large language model, and from that large language model produce like a caricature sketch of the person's face. Now, here's the thing that was cool. We showed right there how that in a life cycle context, when we update the AI algorithm it was using or that large language model, we could create that update literally in the booth and propagate it to all 5 of those systems wirelessly that were in that booth so that they could actually see, this is how I would handle this when I have a fleet of systems or products that are out into the, that are already deployed by customers and everything. So those would be sort of like, I would say, good examples of things we were able to show people that they could start to do now. Um, but as I said, I mean, it's so early right now. I think that I wouldn't even claim that we've solved those challenges. I'd
Mm,
say that we've,
mm.
we've established we've established that we have thought through how we will solve some of those challenges, and we've started to build that with their help.
I'll maybe back you up by saying that you've established, this program is called TechVision, right? So I would say you've established visions that
Yeah.
you think are possible. You have a roadmap for getting there. One of the reasons why this is so critical and important to this industry now is that you have the traditional OEMs, right? And then we now have everybody being a potential OEM. And these new OEMs are not looking for hardware alone. They're just looking for solutions. They have an idea and they
Yep.
want their supply base to come up with what will get them there. But if you still look at it also, Renesas started as a semiconductor company. And in grafting Altium into Renesas, haven't you changed the DNA of the company?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, Balaji, um, I think that that's something that takes time, right? As a company comes in, but I do see that happening. So here's a case in point. I mean, even
Okay.
again, Renaissance 365 has been this idea that amongst a number of us, we began, sort of talking about it and brainstorming and things like that. But when we were going to go to embedded world, we had to, I mean, it was only a couple of months' time really to get a pretty big team on board to build the prototype and to be able to communicate what it is and what's its intention and things like that. And I think Renesas as a much larger company than Altium has, there's a lot of process baked in a
Okay.
lot, and so things there's a lot of people to get involved. There's I would in some ways moves a little bit slower because of all that process and all those people. Altium's been
Mm.
a very agile company, almost like a big startup for a long time. And so there's, at Altium, we like to say we sometimes a little, fast and loose. So
Yeah.
bringing those two cultures together is definitely pretty challenging. And I think we're changing each other. And,
Right. Right.
my sense is that we'll meet somewhere in the middle, which will be good for both of us. So
And
yeah,
and good for the customers also because basically you're setting vision, you are meeting them at the point of their own visions too.
Yeah. And I think it is a unique combination, right? I can't think of another combination of companies quite like Renesas and Altium that exists today. So I think, for me, it's really cool because at Altium we used to talk about transformation of the electronics industry. And we had big vision, but sort of like limited capital, limited capability. And now together with Renaissance, we got so much more capability.
You've
So
got a big brother.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We're now
Now,
big family. Yeah.
you're part of a much larger family. So let's talk about applications. It's maybe it's an unfair question in a sense, because the applications run across the entire industry. I mean, how you use Renesas 365.
Hmm.
So let's say you are just in a room filled with um, representatives from various companies, and you don't even know, where they play in the electronics industry. How would they use it? How would you tell them what should they start doing and how do they proceed with Renesas 365?
Yeah. So, the interesting thing about it is that it's kind of modular in a sense. So,
Okay.
I showed a slide a little bit earlier and we talked about sort of discovery, development, life cycle, those sorts of things. those are literally modules of the system. So
Okay.
you could start with just the discovery portion of it, for example, and say that I want to enable my my engineers to more quickly find solutions that they can start to build their products
Mhm.
upon, and do that in a way where, again, I'm not just creating a sort of like a visual block diagram, but I'm creating one that's got the ability to extend into sort of functional, to understand, is it going to actually work? So that's something that we can do, and that helps everybody, because it helps them to kind of like build out a bill of material, for example, for that system really quickly, rather than have to do that component by component. And part of what part of what we're building into that I haven't even mentioned yet is our intention is that this is an open platform. So it will
Okay.
not only
Right.
be showcasing Renesas hardware and components, it will be showcasing, like Altium has done through Octopart. It'll give people the opportunity to find components that could come from other silicon manufacturers. They could come from TI, they could come from Microchip or ST Micro. It doesn't matter really. Um, we like to think that it's going to, our being together is going to provide people an opportunity where they get the very best experience when they work with Renesas products. But we also recognize Renesas doesn't have every single component one would need. So it does require this more heterogeneous approach, and we are committed to this idea of building that open platform. So, anyways, getting back to your question, they could start with one thing like discovery. They could also say, no, I really want to focus on the detailed design phase and how embedded software and PCB design maybe have to work together more. Or they could say, I really am attracted to this life cycle element and fleet management and things like that. So it really is a matter of them being able to identify where are the biggest challenges that they have today. So and where do I start? What's the first sort of obstacle that I want to get out of my way, and then I can maybe think about expanding on that over time.
This modular system, I know, Ted, I've taken a lot of your time, but I'm going to try and squeeze a little bit more, if
Great.
you don't mind. This modular system, you could have somebody who says, okay, I'm starting on the silicon side. We're not a traditional semiconductor company, but that's where really I want to start. Let's take a hyperscaler as an example. You talked about the discovery, the development life cycle, and all that stuff. The software end, as you know, it has become such a huge part of what companies focus on now. They want to be able to make sure that the hardware they have now is not just going to die on them in 5 years, especially in the automotive industry. You want over-the-air update and stuff like that. How is Renesas 365 positioned to support your customer in that area, or that vision that you have for it, at least for now?
Yeah, no, again, you're highlighting a really good example where I think, a lot of people can relate to this terrible thing that sometimes can happen when you uh, might make an update to software and you literally brick your device,
Mhm.
right? And just using kind of like the industry slang here in terms of bricking it, you just made it non-functional. And because it's out in the field, now you're saying, oh, now it's really hard for me to correct that, to fix that. So maybe I'm better off to just, build an entirely new
Start
product.
all over.
Yeah, start all over, and you don't want to be able to do that. So, or you don't want to have to do that. So I think that this is one of these examples where, because we can have this in this the example I'll use would be an over-the-air kind of ability
Mhm,
to
mhm.
update, correct, maintain, apply patches, things like that to your software. It's definitely one of the big challenges that gets that is solved, or potentially solved, by virtue of this platform and its lifecycle capability.
I was at Embedded World, and Renesas 365 was the story at Embedded World for many of us. Maybe Ted, maybe I'll make this my last question, but you'll understand why I want to ask these. People are always looking for what's next. Okay, what's next? What's Renesas got up its sleeves? What's going to come out of Renesas 365? Do you have other ideas? What products? What should we be looking out for? What do you have on in the future when we look ahead? I mean, again, this is Tech Vision. So, what do you have ahead? What other areas are you exploring that you want listeners to learn about and to hear about?
Yeah, well, so I am just, again, sort of, I'm not keyed in. I'm not really a part of the silicon design, so I might not be able to tell you much about like what
Mhm.
new MCUs and what new MPUs are going to be coming out. But what I would say is that um, one thing that we're doing is again, sort of like moving more towards solutions. And you saw the start
Okay.
of that with this idea of having um, winning combinations, right? And the idea of the Renaissance winning combinations is to say that,
Mm.
hey, these things work together really well in the context of particular applications. And I think that was the start of it. But I think you're going to see more and more Renaissance and I think you opened actually you opened this webcast with that sort of point that Renesas is becoming a systems company, not just a silicon company. And I think that is definitely true. The other thing I would say is that we're definitely investing a lot, like many are, into AI. So one of the acquisitions that Renesas made was of a company called Reality AI and their technology. And so that's an area that we see that as critical to the future and making, big investment there as well. And maybe underlying the whole thing again is it's great that we're advancing technology, whether it's in miniaturization or it's in, you know, less power consumption, in putting in AI in products and everything. But how much better will it be if we do that in a way where things are connected, where we're doing applying system level thinking in the way in the products, but also in the way that you can develop your products with our products. So I think that to me is, again, from a high level, we'll do all those sort of detailed technology advancements and everything. But the key thing to me is that it all is going to work so much better when we're working in a connected, collaborative way.
I like that very much. If I was going to start something that I hope will be catchy in future, I like the way you said Renaissance winning combination. I like it so much that I'm saying to myself, okay, I can't let Ted go without asking him to explain and kind of spell out that winning combination, the way you see that phrase, that winning combination, because it talks to the customers, it talks to the end cost, it talks to the customers. What is that? What is, that winning combination? How do you mean it? I mean, that's
Yeah,
my last question, Ted.
yeah, no, 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 fair enough. And I mean it in the way that, we have, I think it has sort of dimensions or layers to it in that, we definitely see that we can couple for example, a microprocessor with a power subsystem as an example, and
Okay.
saying, okay, again, these things work together really well because the power consumption of this microprocessor is such that this is the perfect sort of like, power
Mhm.
accompaniment to that, as an example. But I think also combining the silicon with software is
Okay.
also a key thing. And that to me is another, way that you can think of this idea of winning combinations. And then taking all of those things and saying, all right, well, let me have more of this full sort of like life cycle and solution context to it. How do I think of this as not just the silicon, not just that power system, not just the software, but I want to really, think of it as a whole system. I think that's where, winning combination is really, again, it's a vision, in a
Right.
way to say that we want to put all of these things together so that they work together really effectively and that engineers at our customers don't have to do the hard work of figuring out what works together, but that we can help them with that and actually provide to them, those things that if they choose them, they can be assured they're going to work together really well, whether that's, an algorithm on the embedded software side, or it's subsystems within their hardware, or it's the whole thing, together.
Ted, you've done one thing that one of your colleagues, who I consider a dear friend, kept telling me, just wait, just wait. He asked me to wait a whole year. Says, telling me, look, Renesas and Altium, there's a story, there's a connection here. And I kept telling him, I don't get it. I'm struggling to tell this story. In this conversation, you've helped me to do that. But you've done more than that, because when I started out, what I said to your colleagues who helped set up this conversation was, um, the title of this is Explaining Renesas 365. You've done more than that. You've actually had to explain what that winning combination means in terms of for the entire industry and not just for Renesas Altium. So this conversation has been with Ted Pawela. Ted is the head of customer success at Renesas 365. It has been a pleasure talking with you. I don't know if you have any last words, Ted, but this has been a very pleasant conversation from my end here.
Well, thank you, Balaji. I think, my last words would be, that we want people to see it. I'd love for you to see it, in fact, and have one of my colleagues kind of, give you the demonstration. But to the broader,
How
audience
soon
of,
can we see it?
um, I think we're ready to show you the prototype, like I said, and
Okay.
the finished product will be a little bit later, but I think you'd be very pleasantly, I don't know if I'd say surprised, hopefully not too surprised, but I think you would be pleasantly impressed, let's say that, to see the progress that we've made already, and I think we can arrange for that, in the very near future.
I'm going to take you up on that. Thank you very much, Ted. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much, Balaji.